In today's video, we are going to be talking about the Spearhead for the Disciples of Tzeentch. If you want to skip ahead to a specific part, definitely make sure to make use of the timestamps down in the timeline below or in the description, because we are going to be talking about the rules, upgrades, savings, and more. And with that, let's jump into the summary of the box. What we are looking at here is roughly 610 points. There have been some points changes and adjustments recently for Age of Sigmar, and the Disciples of Tzeentch got updated as well, so the points here should be the new and updated ones. Furthermore, we are getting 27 miniatures. We are looking at a fairly diverse box with lots of different units, which I usually very like, because it makes this box more viable to purchase multiple times, because that way you get more of the core units you want anyway, multiple times should you pick it up more. So we are going to talk about whether picking this box up multiple times is worth it in the upgrade part of the video, but generally speaking, it's a great box purely from a miniature perspective, because you're getting lots and lots of different stuff. The one thing that is a little bit annoying about this box is that you cannot run this as a regiment in full Age of Sigmar. That is a little bit of an annoyance, simply because it requires you to then pick up another leader choice or another character that is able to lead the Screamers as well as the Flamers, like a Changeling, for example. And as far as the rules go, we're obviously going to go over them step by step in a little bit. But if you're interested in checking them out for yourself, if you want to read up on them, definitely check out the pinned comment down below. With the update of the new Warhammer community website, I had to update all the linked PDFs, and I hope I did that for all the different Spearhead videos. So if you want to check them out, there's a playlist down there as well for all the reviews I've already done. And that should give you a nice overview over this box. Cool miniatures overall. You're getting decent miniatures as well for the faction. Is all of it competitive? Obviously not, but we're not looking for competitive choices here. We're looking for good game pieces on the table, decent savings, and hopefully a fun Spearhead to play with. Because ultimately, these Spearheads are perfect beginner boxes if you want to jump into Age of Sigmar proper, so if you just start Age of Sigmar from scratch, or if you want to start a new faction. Spearheads, just like Combat Patrols for 40k, are usually the best way to get into a faction, because it gives you a decent starting point, you're saving money. So when it comes to the value perspective of Spearheads, there's usually not that much debate whether these boxes are worth it or not, unless you obviously don't like any of the miniatures included in a Spearhead, and you are buying into the Disciples of Tzeentch, for example, because you want to run lots of changes and Kairos Fate Weaver and so on. In that case, this box is not going to help you out too much, and buying stuff separately is more helpful. But if you are looking at the Disciples of Tzeentch as a whole, and if you like the miniatures included, usually Spearheads are always worth it. Next up, let's take a look at the list so you have a little bit of a better overview of what you're actually getting in this box. As I said, I couldn't squeeze all the units into one regiment, which is a little bit of an annoyance, but definitely fixable if you want to play full Age of Sigmar. That is no problem for Spearhead or the game mode at all. But if you want to jump over to regular Age of Sigmar, you're going to probably want to add another character that is able to lead your Flamers and Screamers, as I explained earlier. So getting a Magister on Disc of Tzeentch. This is a fairly mobile unit, fairly useful, very utility based, and a pretty cool model, a very recent model that's released I think in 2019 or something in a 2-player battle box, which is pretty cool. So if you can find that one, we are going to talk about that in the upgrade section. You're getting 10 Carrick Acolytes. You're going to get all the stuff that you need for them, like additional banners and bits and so on the sprue. So whether you want to equip them with shields and so on, it's all up to you. Now, the Carrick Acolytes are usually coming in boxes of 20, not in boxes of 10. And it's a little bit of a shame that we are not getting the full 20 of them here in this particular box, but it is what it is. It's still a solid unit, and you can definitely run it, and it's great at holding objectives. Then we have 10 Zangors. Zangors, again, offer you all the options on their sprues. So 4 Great Blades, you're getting the banner, you're getting shield options, regular two-handed weapons, all the shenanigans. And it is great to have on a sprue because that's not always normal, at least in Age of Sigmar. So getting all of that on one sprue is awesome. And Zangors, again, similar to Carrick Acolytes, are a little bit more elite than the Carrick Acolytes and fill more or less the same role. You want to hold objectives with them, you want to have a few more models on the board with them, and yeah, just run around, clog up the board, and that's basically their role. And then we have our Flamers. These are basically the units that are there to take out swarms of units. You get tons of attacks, they are fairly mobile, and that's basically their role. More elite unit, fairly focused on what they're supposed to do. That's exactly what we want. And the Screamers of Tzeentch are fairly similar in that they're super fast, they're great at just being an annoying harasser unit, and they're great at just, taking objectives out of nowhere. So overall, I think that the particular list, as I said in the summary, is great because you're getting a little bit of everything, except for obviously the bigger models like the Lord of Change or Chariots and so on. But as far as basic infantry and some of their slightly more elite choices go, like the Flamers and the Screamers, you're getting a wide variety of units, and it is awesome to see. And that is, in my opinion, why this box is probably worth it to pick up a second time, simply so you can reinforce everything and just have the options ready to go. And if you can reinforce everything, at that point, it is also great to then add lots of changes and so on, because at that point, you have your basic infantry sorted out, at least in my opinion, and you can focus on the big stuff next. Next up, we are going to be looking at the price and the savings. The price is always the same. It's a little bit surprising that this box is as expensive as it is in Australia, but it is what it is. As far as the savings go, we're looking between 24 and 30%. The average here is approximately somewhere in the neighborhood of 28%, which is a little bit below average. We usually expect 30% here, but it is what it is. Overall, as I said, the Magister of Tzeentch having them multiple times is not bad, but also not necessarily useful. So if you are thinking of picking this box up twice, maybe you have an idea of just, kit bashing them into a Tzaangor Shaman or something on disc, which should be possible in my opinion. But if you have two Magisters of Tzeentch, that's not a bad idea either, and assembling them. But yeah, you're usually going to be running one max. As far as the rest of the savings go, they're pretty decent. With the price increases that we had again this year, the savings went up a tiny bit compared to last year, but it doesn't make too much of a difference. It's more or less an average box as far as savings go. So if you pick it up a second time, definitely consider that second Magister on disc and figure out whether you can make them happen twice in your list or whether you can kit bash them somehow to make this second purchase a little bit more valuable, other than just buying it a second time and leaving the other Magister on disc on sprue. Next up, let's jump into the upgrade section of the video. As I said earlier, I wanted to make it work so you can bring your Flamers and your Screamers as non-auxiliary units into your list, and it required me to more or less bring a Changecaster or a Fate Skimmer or something of the like. And the ideal box to get in addition to this particular Spirit, if you didn't want to get it twice, is the Chariot, because it gives you a ton of options. If you build the Changecaster, it allows you to then build an additional Burning Chariot. If you build an Exalted Flamer, then the Burning Chariot option goes away, but it allows you to still build the Fate Skimmer and so on. You're going to figure everything out if you get the box. It's going to be all in the instructions. But this particular kit gives you a ton of options, and I think it's an excellent next buy, even though the choices may not be super competitive in there. If you're playing casually, if you're just playing with friends, they're perfectly valuable, perfectly fine on the table as far as the rules go, as far as the points go. So generally speaking, as a non-competitive minded upgrade, I think that the Chariot is the perfect next step after getting this particular Spearhead. In addition, I added some Tzaangor Enlightened just to get us closer to that 1000 points mark. As you can see, this general list is at 960 points, which I think is fine for the general list. In this particular case, we obviously built the Changecaster and the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. And overall, what we added here to our Spearhead is just two boxes. The Chariot, as well as one box of Tzaangor Enlightened, and that's it. And I think overall this list at 1000 points is a ton of fun to play. Furthermore, GW also adjusted the rules for the Tzeentch faction a little bit, where burning is a little bit easier to apply, to maintain and so on. So the faction itself is even more fun to play in Age of Sigmar now, and is a little bit more balanced and geared towards making flaming units and burning units a little bit more vulnerable to your general faction. And the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch is going to help with that massively. So again, getting that Chariot is definitely not a bad idea. Further upgrades beyond that 1000 points list would be Kairos Fate Weaver or Lords of Changes. Basically, the huge models, a lot of people are running both of them. So a Lord of Change and a Kairos Fate Weaver. Getting more Tzaangors is not a bad idea. Getting Tzaangor Skyfires is probably a very good idea. I personally run 9 of them simply because I'm a huge fan of the models. But I also think that they are great rules-wise, even though not a lot of people are running them. I think they're a little bit underrated personally. And if you can find some of the older boxes, like the 2-player battle box that I talked about earlier, where you have the Disciples of Tzeentch on one side and the Caradhran Overlords on the other side, if you can find it for a decent price, because the box wasn't hugely popular and a little bit overprinted, definitely consider getting it. if it's there for a decent price. If not, skip it. You can find a lot of miniatures still around over on eBay separately, separate sprues and so on. So definitely make sure to use that option all the time before just buying blindly. Checking eBay and so on doesn't cost anything, and it's usually very much worth it. If you have any particular questions about any of the Disciples of Tzeentch units or how to build a list beyond the 1000 points list that I presented here earlier, definitely drop them down in the comments below and I'll try my best to help you out there. And with that, let's talk about the Disciples of Tzeentch Spearhead and its rules in particular. So what you're running, as I said earlier, as a Magister of Tzeentch, you're running Flamers, Screamers, 2 units of 5 Zangors, and a 10-man squad of Kyric Acolytes. Overall, that's an okay list. It's generally a very versatile list. You are running a ton of models. You have a ton of bodies on the table turn 1. There is no weird arriving later shenanigans here or anything. You have a ton of models on turn 1, and that's that. Generally, the first impression here was fairly positive, but as we are going to discover as we go along with the rules, this is probably one of the weaker spearheads, and I'm going to explain why as we go. And real quick, before we move on, what I've done to test these particular spearheads, and that's what I've done for every review, is play at least 5 games with every spearhead. I usually try to handpick my matchups. I've decided to play a couple more games against the cities of Sigmar with this particular box, simply because there are some things that we've discovered during testing that I want to present to you in a little bit. But generally speaking, I test these spearheads rather extensively. I obviously can't play them against every spearhead, but I try to test them rather extensively and spend a lot of time on gameplay trying to kind of figure things out, try different rules, and so on. And with that, let's talk a little bit about the battle trait. So once per battle at the start of the first battle round, you're rolling dice. You basically roll 9 dice, and they are your destiny dice. You can replace any roll before rolling the die with one of those results. And as you can see on the right hand side, you can replace casting rolls, run rolls, charge rolls, hit rolls, wound rolls, and save rolls. If you want to replace 2 dice, you can do so, but you obviously need to spend 2 destiny dice to do that. And for the save rolls, it specifies you must still modify the roll by the rend characteristic of the attacking weapon. It is a great additional rules text, especially for new players, because at that point it gets a little bit wonky, and clarifying that helps. So the Masters of Destiny is a great rule. The only thing that I'm really missing here is the rule that, for example, the Eldari have in Warhammer 40k, where I can remove a die, so basically rolling 8 dice for my next roll, and being able to reroll all of my destiny dice. Because if you screw up your roll, if you're very unlucky, if you roll lots of ones, your battle trait is effectively useless. You're going to be able to replace 1 or 2 dice sometimes, and it's going to be that. And that is a little bit of an annoying thing. I would have liked to have a little bit more consistency here, basically a mulligan system where, as I said, you remove a die and you are able to reroll, and you can do that for as long as you want until just 1 die is left. And I think that would have been a perfect way to upgrade this particular battle trait, which, while I consider to be very strong if you are lucky, it's basically a casino roll and you are completely submitting yourself to the luck gods. And it is generally something that can be fun, but as I said, adding a little bit more of that consistency for a price would have made this entire rule a lot better. Next up, we are going to talk about the regiment abilities. You pick one of the following, either transient forms, which is a passive that's active at all times. The effect is roll a dice each time a friendly Kyric Acolytes model is slain in the combat phase. On a farm, you can return 1 slain model to a friendly Zangos unit within 9 of the slain model. I think here the basic requirements to achieve this particular thing are way too numerous. This requires you to have a Zangor unit in 9 inches to a Kyric Acolytes unit. That Zangor unit has to be missing at least a model. Then you need to roll a 4-up to get a Zangor back, which, let's be honest, Zangors are cool, but they're not that valuable. So this particular rule, I think, is way too complicated for what it tries to achieve. It should have just been, whenever a Kyric Acolyte dies, I roll a 4-up if I have a Zangor unit below strength, so with just 4 or 3 models, and I can return one of them on a 4-up. That's that. Just making it this complex doesn't add anything, and it wouldn't have been too strong, trust me. So transient forms, I'll be honest, this is the regiment ability I picked once for testing simply. I used my Kyric Acolytes as basically cannon fodder in the front whenever I went second instead of going first. and they died, and that's basically that. I placed a unit of Zangors next to them, so I was hoping that my opponent would be attacking the Zangors first, which they never did because they are smart, and the entire rule is so easy to circumvent and just play around that it's just not worth bringing at all, ever. And what you pick at all times is Eternal Conflagration. This one just adds 1 to the rank characteristic of ranged weapons by friendly flamers of Tzeentch. This has a lot of value in this particular box because you generally don't get any rend in this entire box whatsoever. And offensively speaking, this box is very, very weak. So at least adding that 1 additional rend of one of your units is going to help you out a little bit, and it's going to add a little bit of punch to your unit. And as I said, transient forms, too complicated for the ones to achieve, too easy to circumvent, and generally a bad rule. Next up, we are going to be talking about the enhancements. These enhancements are obviously going to apply to your Magister, and please consider that the Magister in general is very squishy. We are talking about a 4-up save, we're talking about 6 wounds, and no ward save whatsoever. So they are going to fold pretty quickly if your opponent wants to focus on them, unless you want to use your Zangors and your Carrick Acolytes as shields, but as soon as your opponent has any range capabilities at all, your Magister is in a lot of trouble. So whenever you look at rules like Demon Heart on the right hand side, which deals an amount of mortal wounds equal to the number of the current battle round, it sounds cool because, you know, on the 4th battle round, you're going to deal 4 mortal wounds, which is a lot of damage, but your general is not going to survive until turn 4. It never did for me, and it's probably not going for you. So generally speaking, Demon Heart, while it sounds cool, I think it's a little bit of a bait. Simply because the damage that you think this is going to inflict is never going to pan out. What it's going to do is inflict 1 mortal damage on the first turn, 2 on the second, and then your general is going to die. Then we have Shield of Fate, which I consider to be a great choice, which is basically you make a cast roll. On a 6-up, you give a unit a ward of 6-up. If they already have a ward save, you just add +1 to that ward save, and that's that. It's an excellent way to add a little bit of toughness to your units, to add a little bit of survivability to your units. And generally speaking, it's rather reliable. You still make a casting roll and so on, but you do have your battle trait, so you can just use some of your dice for that to guarantee it. And giving a ward of 6-up is generally a great thing to have. Glimpse into the Future is again a casting roll. Use it in your hero phase, and on a 7-up, you can roll a dice and add it to your destiny dice. I think this one is the one that is probably going to be the most popular and generally speaking the strongest choice, simply because Destiny dice are going to guarantee a lot of the very important stuff in this particular box. We are going to look at your units in a little bit, but you know, your Carrick Acolytes are dependent on making a casting roll to get an additional rend on their attacks. For that, Destiny dice are probably just necessary to add that additional rend, otherwise you're never going to get any damage through. So Glimpse into the Future is going to help you get more Destiny dice that are hopefully going to have any value, and this is going to help you out a little bit, but generally speaking, all these enhancements are rather weak and subpar. And last but not least, we have Time Slip Pendant. Once per battle in any combat phase, you can pick an enemy unit within 9 of your general, and that unit has the Strike Last ability or debuff this phase. Pretty good, but generally speaking, not the one you pick. In general, I picked Shield of Fate, simply because I like having more durability on my units, but Glimpse into the Future I had the best experience with because Destiny dice are very important. You're playing a very random faction as soon as your Destiny dice go out, or if you made a bad roll, and you're basically playing orcs at that point where everything is just random, and it's generally not what you want to do with your Disciples of Tzeentch. And with that, let's take a quick overview over the units that you have available. So the Magister on disc is, as I said, not super squishy, but they are going to die pretty soon. So 6 health with a 4-up save, as I said, not horrible, but also not that great. What makes this unit super good is a move of 14 inches. This means that this unit is going to be wherever you need it to be. If you need to hold a specific objective, because you draw a secondary objective that requires you to be on a specific one, this guy is probably going to enable you to do that. Positioning them in the midfield or in the midboard is going to be your best play if you can. And generally speaking, yeah, the move characteristic is what makes this guy special. Other than that, we only have very basic weapons. As you can see, 1 attack at range with basic stats, no rend, D3 damage. All your melee attacks deal D3 damage, which I guess is pretty okay. but it's very volatile and you're more often than not going to roll a 1 whenever it's most inconvenient, and you get no rend, so actually getting these attacks through, especially against armies like Slaves to Darkness or Stormcast Eternals, which I tested against, is horrible. It's really bad. So just something to consider. Offensively, if you're playing against Skaven and so on, this guy's actually pretty good. But if you play against anything that has a 3-up armor save, this guy's just doomed. As far as the Bolt of Change go, you just roll 2d6 as a casting roll within 18 inches. You roll a 6, you're good. You deal d3 mortal damage, and if there's a Zangor unit within 18, you can return 1 slain mortal to that unit, which has happened a few times. Generally speaking, as I said, bringing Zangors back, pretty cool if it happens, but this is more of a random thing. If it does happen, you're going to be fine. If not, it's not that big of a deal. Next up, we have our Carrick Acolytes. As I said, save of 5 up, just 1 wound. They're fairly slow with a 5-inch movement, and yeah, they have a ranged attack, which I guess counts for something, which makes them a little bit more valuable than your regular super basic infantry. But generally speaking, as I said, they have no rend and they rely on their Gestalt sorcery, where in the shooting phase they can add 1 to the rend characteristic of their sorcerer's bolts. This doesn't even count for the cursed blades, which we first thought whenever we tested this. We quickly noticed that this is not the case. It just applies to your sorcerer's bolts. As you can see, you're hitting on 4s, wounding on 3s. It's just 1 attack. So while it's very important for this particular spear to actually get that additional rend, it is not going to have as big of an impact as we would have hoped. The better thing to have here, in my opinion, as far as balancing goes, would have been to apply the additional rend to the cursed blades rather than the sorcerer's bolts. It would have had more impact and made this entire spirit a little bit more cohesive and just get a little bit more damage through. Now, what makes them good though is that they are in a unit of 10 and they have a control score of 1, so you're getting 10 control if none of them died. Sadly, as we've seen, they're pretty easy to kill and their control score is going to diminish fairly quickly, but as long as they're a full unit, your opponent is going to struggle at least to take objectives away from them on turn 1. Next up, we have the Screamers of Tzeentch. Again, super quick unit, 14-inch movement, 3 health, just a 5-up save, but thankfully we have a ward of 6 up, which makes them deceptively a little bit tankier than you expect, but don't expect them to do any miracles. They have a control score of 1, so holding objectives with them is doable, but a little bit tricky. Just free control if all your Screamers are alive, but their attacks are okay. We get our first non-conditional rend, which is 3 attacks, hit on 4s, wounds on 3s, which is basically all your attacks. 1 rend, 1 damage, and that's that. No special ability, no nothing. And then we have Slashing Fins in your movement phase. Pick 1 enemy unit that any of the models have passed across, and then you, on a 4-up for each one of them, inflict 1 mortal damage to that target. That is very easy to achieve. The board is tiny, you get a lot of movement with this particular unit, and as long as you have that available, you should always do that no matter what. Standing on an objective is definitely important, but just flying over a unit doesn't require you to actually move that far. You can just move 7 inches one direction and 7 back, and it technically counts as movement. So you should be fine as far as that goes, and activating Slashing Fins should be doable every single turn at all times. So the Screamers of Tzeentch, possibly, in my opinion, the best unit in this entire box. Next up, we have our Zangors. Zangors, obviously 6-inch move, which is pretty good. They have 2 health instead of just 1 compared to the Carrick Acolytes. And other than that, they are fairly similar. They have their basic melee weapon, no rend. They have Long Plant Strike. While this unit is wholly within enemy territory, its melee weapons have crit 2 hits. This is definitely a rule that is possible to activate more than once, and you can definitely force it if you just run your Zangors into the opponent. But as always, this is a rule that is very, very heavily impacted by who has the first turn. If you have the first turn, this entire box is a little bit better. As soon as you have to go second, this entire box, in my opinion, crumbles to dust. And even if you get the first turn, it's not like this box is doing anything crazy or anything, because yes, you are getting crit 2 additional hits on a weapon that's generally bad. So it kind of balances itself out as soon as you get the first turn and you're able to charge your opponent on the first turn. But yeah, if you go second, in my opinion, this box really starts crumbling and you stop having fun with this particular one. So overall, the Zangors, not a horrible unit by any means. Decent at objective holding. You have 2 units of 5 of them, which is pretty decent. And their rule is not horrible or anything, but they are very dependent on whether you go first or second. And last but not least, we have our Flamers of Tzeentch, which, remember, the weird flame is more often than not going to have a rend characteristic of 1 because of our battle trait, which makes it a little bit better. We are having a move characteristic of 9, which basically means that the entire box is fairly quick, except for your Carrack Acolytes. You get average to way above average movement, and you are highly flexible as far as the board state goes. Sadly, the board is tiny, and getting huge movement values while still pretty decent, it doesn't have as much value as it would have on a full 2000 points board or on a slightly bigger board like a Combat Patrol board, for example. So overall, the Flamers are pretty decent, especially with Rend 1. At that point, damage G3 can do a lot of damage considering you get 9 attacks out of a unit, especially if they're just, full model count. And then you get a passive, Capricious Weird Flame, at 1 to the hit rolls for attacks made by this unit if it targets a unit that has 5 or more models, which is going to happen more often than not. So overall, hitting on 2s, wounding on 4s, and then having Rend 1, damage G3 on the ranged attack, and then the melee attack is more or less the basic stuff that you expect, is not horrible, but also not great. As I said, offensively, this box is really struggling. And as soon as you play against any faction that has a save of 3 up, or even factions that have a save of 4 up, you are going to struggle a fair bit. So to summarize the rules a little bit, out of the 7 games I've played 2 against them, against the cities of Sigmar. Those are the only games that I've won. And I've played the other 5 games against 2 factions that have a 3-up save. So one of them was the Stormcast Eternals, the other was Slaves to Darkness. And I've played once against Skaven and twice against some other factions like Fire Slayers and so on, just to get a little bit of a feel against other factions that have a little bit of a different defensive profile especially. And I lost all of them. And I've tried my best to win. I really try hard there, and it was very difficult. This entire box is really struggling as far as damage goes. It is struggling as far as durability goes, and the rules don't make up for it at all. Yes, you have a wide variety of units, and yes, they are very quick. But it matters very little if your opponent goes first and if they are just tying them up in melee combat on turn 1, and you get punished for just basically getting out of combat, because remember, that is going to net you mortal wounds if you try to get out of melee combat, and you generally are going to struggle to score any points. So my experience is that as soon as you go second, you've basically lost. Another thing to consider is that you get no reinforcements whatsoever. You could argue that yes, you have a lot of models on the table turn 1. On the other hand, everything is going to be dead by turn 2 or 3, simply because you're dead, squishy, and vulnerable. And I think that this is one of the spearheads that definitely needs help rules-wise. I don't think that they need to change anything as far as the units go. I think they're great, they have their strengths and weaknesses, but what needs tweaking, as I said, are the Destiny dice. They should allow you a mulligan there. What needs a rework are the regiment abilities, which one of them is completely useless in my eyes, and the other one is just a little bit of, just a band-aid fix on your very low damage, which is just adding a rend characteristic on the range attack of your Flamers. I think they could have done way better here and something way more helpful, and we didn't get that. And as far as the enhancement goes, there's just a lot of the stuff there that is okay. Some of it is worse, but generally speaking, this entire spearhead is way too reliant on too many dice rolls. You're rolling a trillion dice for very little effect. It is very much gambling. If your Destiny dice suck, your game sucks. If you go second, you've basically lost. There's way too much reliability on way too many things. What they should have done is made the Disciples of Tzeentch a very reliable and very quick faction, and instead made them squishy and vulnerable at least on turn 2 onwards, giving them something that is going to enable them to stay alive on turn 1. To give them a little bit of play if you go second is, I think, vital for this box to make it fun to play. Now, one thing that I wanted to add as a little bit of a special or a bonus is that we've discovered that playing this particular box against the cities of Sigmar Spirit, which I haven't reviewed on the channel yet, but it's going to be probably the next box I'm going to review, those 2 boxes are weirdly very balanced against each other because they're both bad. So in a vacuum, if you have the chance, and if you want to play the Tzeentch Spearhead, and if you have the chance to play it against the cities of Sigmar 1, definitely take that chance and definitely play it, because that is a matchup that is genuinely very, very fun and very rewarding. So if you have a friend who's playing Cities of Sigmar, definitely consider playing that matchup, because yeah, it's fun. It's balanced between the two boxes, and it's a lot of fun to play them against each other. So if you have the chance, definitely try to figure it out. So overall, as far as the box goes, I think that the value here is pretty apparent. I think upgrading it in Full Age of Sigmar is definitely an easy thing to do, because Tzeentch just offers a lot of stuff for you, and the box itself has a lot of inherent value with a lot of different units that are going to be a great starting point for your Disciples of Tzeentch. And buying it twice, not a bad idea at all, because as I said, you get a lot of stuff twice, you can reinforce it, and then focus on the bigger stuff like the Kairos Fate Weaver, like the Lord of Change, and so on. So from a value proposition and from a viewpoint on 1000 or 2000 points game, I think this box is amazing. As far as Spearhead goes, this box has so many flaws that I think that this is one of the bottom 3 Spearhead boxes, at least as it stands right now. If I've reviewed a little bit more of them, I'm at some point going to make a tier list that is going to be featuring many different aspects like gameplay and value and beginner friendliness that we are going to talk about. So definitely subscribe for that if you're interested in any of those tier lists. And as far as just the gameplay goes, this is probably going to be bottom 3. Drop your comments down below if you disagree or not, but that's generally my viewpoint as it stands. With that, I hope this video was insightful. If you have any questions or anything to add, drop it down in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.